Hi everyone. My name is Sargun Kaur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Byteboard. Super excited to be back, albeit in a little bit of a different circumstance. I had such a great time in Vienna last year, and I'm sad that I can't be there in person this year, but um, definitely miss the city and hope y'all are doing safe and are healthy. This year, I wanted to share my story around how I met my co-founder and all the steps we took to building our team and a healthy relationship, a co-founding relationship between us. Um, I can't promise that any of these tips apply to finding your dating partner. Hi everyone. My name is Sargun Kaur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Byteboard. Super excited to be back, albeit in a little bit of a different circumstance. I had such a great time in Vienna last year, and I'm sad that I can't be there in person this year, but um, definitely miss the city and hope y'all are doing safe and are healthy. This year, I wanted to share my story around how I met my co-founder and all the steps we took to building our team and a healthy relationship, a co-founding relationship between us. Um, I can't promise that any of these tips apply to finding your dating partner or your marriage partner, but it may seem like a lot of these tips seem to match um, oftentimes dating advice, because when you're finding your co-founder, it is very much like finding someone that you need to be able to trust in every aspect of your life. I'll go more into this in just a little bit. Like I mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Byteboard. I started Byteboard about 2.5 years ago. I was a software engineer at Google before that. Byteboard's founded in Area 120 inside of a Google incubator, so we're fully Google funded. Byteboard is a technical interviewing platform that ensures that we're building a technical interview that actually focuses what engineers do on the job. If you're familiar with technical interviews, oftentimes it's like whiteboard interviews or very theoretical style interviews. So we've changed the game, and now a lot of companies in the Bay Area and in New York, hopefully internationally soon, are using Byteboard to interview engineers. So a lot of you are in your early stages of building a startup, putting together your team. Two of the most common causes of startup failure, and you're probably familiar with this, are not finding product market fit or having co-founder issues. And when it comes to finding a co-founder, most people think, hey, I'm just going to find someone who is really passionate about the same idea I am, and that's it. We'll start working together. But it's not that simple. Just like how marriage isn't as simple as just finding someone you can have kids with, or there's so many different factors that go into making sure that you found a co-founder that you can work through really hard times with and celebrate your successes with. You both have to have similar levels of risk tolerance. You should be at the same level in terms of wanting the same things in your career and your personal life. A startup takes a lot out of you. I've spent so many hours, so many days, at my co-founder's apartment, or she's been here as we've spent nights fixing bugs or developing our product. And you both need to have that same level of dedication. If someone is off, then you're going to start having issues come up that are not going to do well for your startup. So you really want to look at your financial circumstance. What's the communication style? What are the skill sets they offer? Particularly on the skill set. So Nikki and I, my co-founder, before we started, we had a whole conversation on, in 5 years, Nikki wanted to actually start doing something else. So we're like, hey, can we build this in 5 years? Is that an okay plan? I am aware of what she wants and she's aware of what I want. So putting out and discussing all of that before you get into a hard life, which is startup, it's not always glamorous. It's really important. And one of the biggest things I learned is, we often talk about opposites attracting, but oftentimes, particularly when you're building a startup and looking for a co-founder, having overlapping views is actually really helpful as well. So I'll give you some particular examples. In terms of how my co-founder and I are opposite, Nikki is she loves taking a risk. I am very risk tolerant sometimes. But when it comes to building Byteboard and building our product, we are so aggressive in terms of, being very scrappy and building something to last, building something quickly. In terms of how we build our team, we're very similar in how we think. We really, really trust each other. But she is a designer. She's able to take risks. She's able to start things. I, on the other hand, I come from an engineering background. I handle a lot of our marketing and our business and our sales stuff as well. And I'm not as good of a designer as her, so that's where our skill sets are able to match up and build a full spectrum, if you must say, that helps us succeed as a startup. In terms of other things, for example, how we're very mission driven, how we build our team and what we want our team to feel like, what the culture should be, those things that we're really, really overlapping on. And that actually builds a really solid relationship and foundation. So at the foundation level, you want to be able to overlap in how you think about your product, what your mission is. But when it comes to the skill sets and what ideas people have, how people work, at that point, if you have different skill set, it actually you're actually able to build out a wider skill pool to make you move faster when you're building your startup. This is a chart. Nikki and I, our coach, our executive coach, showed us very early on. So I want to take a minute to actually tell you about executive coaches. They're couples counseling kind of, but for co-founders or founding teams. And we found that to be very, very helpful. We still have an executive coach 2 years later. It's not necessarily that you have a problem with each other, but it's actually helping you communicate. And I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned with having a co-founder and making sure my co-founding relationship's really solid, is making sure to communicate every step of the way. There's going to be so much that happens in terms of, some bug might happen, a deal might fall through. Startup land is just, sometimes I ask myself why I'm so crazy to kind of take this on, but it's also very thrilling. But there's a lot of issues that come up. Even if you talk about it constantly, there's going to be disagreements. And oftentimes what our coach told us is any two people in a relationship, whether that be a co-founding relationship or something else, fall into one or the other camp. You're either anxious, so you worry a lot, you may initiate conflict, or constantly needed reassurances. You may feel devalued if there's not enough conversation, and there's fewer boundaries. This is an exact archetype of my co-founder, Nikki. We saw this chart and we started laughing because at that point we had just had a disagreement, and we looked at this chart and we're like, oh, this makes sense. Nikki's very anxious, I'm very avoidant, and we didn't know how to communicate with each other in the beginning. An avoidant is the opposite of anxious. So it's someone who's a lot more independent but shies away from conflict. Oftentimes feels overwhelmed or seems distant, and kind of retreats in and disengages. As to build kind of a strong co-founder relationship, what we've seen in my startup with Nikki and I is we need to figure out how to kind of bridge the gap and come to the center. And the way we do that is we oftentimes use the language that we've learned through our coach here, where it's like, hey, when you did this, it made me feel anxious. So you're able to bank in on the language that you've learned in terms of, you know, making sure you have solid communication, and express that back to your co-founder or your partner and say, hey, and it really helps you understand the behavior of your co-founder or someone else on your team. So I've been super lucky to find my one in terms of my co-founder. That's a picture of Nikki and me looking longingly into her eyes. The biggest lessons I've learned, again, is to reiterate, number one, make sure you're not just finding a co-founder that you think will be, you know, will be the right for the idea, but you're actually asking all those questions of, you know, what are their communication styles like? What's their risk tolerance like? What's their financial stability like? A number of different questions. And the way I would do that is have very deep conversations, very honest and vulnerable conversations before starting up a project with someone. Number two, one thing I will add there is oftentimes we're like, hey, I'm friends with this person, I'll just go start a business with them. You want to be very careful, because when I started doing a project early on, my earlier startup in college, I started with two of my best friends, and it was horrible. We didn't communicate with each other. We didn't want it, you know, we were friends, so we were too hesitant to say anything to each other. And that's not how you can really progress in your startup. You have to be able to say the hard truths, and you're not always going to agree. There's going to be so many factors that come in, so you want to make sure that you have open communication channels with whoever you start this journey with. And number two, like, build up, you know, understand what your skill sets are, what you're looking for, and see where you overlap and where you're separate, or where you're complementary to each other. You want to make sure at the foundational level you're overlapping, and in terms of the skill sets, you're complementary. So you're not only, like, if you're both designers, you're both going to want to work on the same thing. But if one person's a designer and one person's an engineer, that's actually great, because you can build an MVP together. You can build your initial product together, and that's what worked really well for my co-founder and I. And then lastly, build up that language to talk to each other. Understand what are your communication styles? What are the ways that you react to disagreements or problems? So you can start seeing the patterns when that happens. There's always going to be disagreements. There's always going to be something happens. But once you're able to see the patterns, you're able to have those conversations with your co-founder quickly and resolve them. Like I mentioned, two of the biggest reasons startups fail, one of them is co-founder relationships. I know a lot of investors nowadays have started to look at, you know, how do the co-founders interact with each other before they even invest in a startup. So it has become a really important kind of thing that they check for before they put the money in, and for good reason. So with that, I hope that quick little speech was very helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I hope I get to see you all maybe next year.
Thank you very much for this insightful talk. So you have to be very, very high in openness when you want to be co-founder, right? Because people are so reluctant to talk openly and to like really get into the deep talk. I totally understand. I have one question. Are you still friends with the two people who you started you started in the college? Are you still friends, or did you separate?
That's a really good question. Right, kind of when we started to feel like it was getting very tricky, I actually stepped out of the startup. I stopped working on it because I wanted to prioritize my friendship with those two people. but it took a little while for us to go back to normal because it had gotten so messy and so weird between us. I'm very thankful that I prioritized in that case my friendship over like continuing to work on a startup, because the startup wasn't going very far because we weren't communicating well, and I didn't want to have to sacrifice my friendship over a failed startup.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.